Well, how about what do you do when you receive or are given a compliment that you just are not quite sure what that was? You know, those kind of backhanded compliments that you just don't quite know. And really, is it a compliment or is there a little insult in there?
The idea of the compliment, it starts out seemingly as a compliment and then it morphs into an insult.
Did he mean that? Or did she mean that?
Many of my friends, I think, truly wanted to compliment me on my weight loss. They would say things to me like, "Oh my gosh, you look so good now." What, I wasn't handsome before, or I didn't look good before?
When people find out that I'm an immigrant Filipina, it's amazing how many people say, "Oh, well, where's your accent? You speak really well."
Do I save face like, "Oh, thank you so much"? I don't want to thank them for it.
Because we cannot control others, are there parts of it that we can take solely as a compliment? Do we even look at it or receive it as an insult?
Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Leonard.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio. And Zachary, you know how the past couple episodes we've talked about, when someone just doesn't like you. Mm-hmm. And then our most recent one is, when someone is wrong about you. Well, how about what do you do when you receive or are given a compliment that you just are not quite sure what that was? And what I mean by that is, everybody has received, I'm sure, those kind of backhanded compliments that you just don't quite know. And really, is it a compliment or is there a little insult in there? And you taught me the term compliment, and I'm just going to kick it up a notch a little bit, because as I have been the recipient of many of these backhanded compliments, as a woman, as an immigrant, I've just received many a backhanded compliment. Sometimes there is the compliment salt where it's more compliment, and the giver of the phrase really truly meant it as a compliment, but really there didn't mean to be insulting, but it wasn't quite the full compliment that they intended to be. Then there's, on the flip side, really the compliment salt, where it's really truly more insult than it was compliment, and it was kind of passive aggressive or microaggression or really a dig. What do we do with those? How do you handle that?
Dr. Ignacio, first and foremost, I've got to give a shout out to a former colleague of mine who is really the person that coined this word in my mind. Now, maybe she got it from somebody else, but I think she was the one that said that she came up with it. And it's the idea of the compliment. It starts out seemingly as a compliment, and then it morphs into an insult, right? Which is why she established kind of the word morph, or the word marriage, as a compliment. Right?
Yes.
So this is a shout out to Michelle Sussman. So thank you for giving me this term and allowing us to bring up what I think is something that not only happens on the daily for me, it sounds like it happens on the daily for you and many other people. So, as we were talking or preparing for this episode, I immediately thought of when I was in college and I went abroad. I lost a tremendous amount of weight upon returning back to the States. And I was really proud of that, because it was something that I was doing intentionally. And, I was exercising more. I was trying to eat better. And it was really my first time living in a big city on my own. And I felt so much independence. And I was also, part of a really strong gay community or queer community, being in London. And, now there's bars and nightlife, et cetera. Actually, that gets to another compliment, which I'll share in a little bit, but has to do with my queerness, right? But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyway, so I felt so much independence, and I wanted to really take charge of my life, and I wanted to do it with my health. And when I returned, what was fascinating was many of my friends at school, I think truly, to your point, wanted to compliment me on my weight loss. But what actually happened was it became more of an insult. So it really became a backhanded compliment. And they would say things to me like, oh my gosh, you look so good now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or, they would say things like, look how much weight you lost. You're so handsome. And just, I would also say that kind of the onslaught of so many of these compliments again and again and again, even if I knew that they were definitely more intended to be a compliment, I found myself getting kind of snarky and also like wanting to have some zingers back at them, or just like, I wasn't handsome before, or I didn't look good before. That was, I found myself, my inner monologue was starting to go a place of snark, which I think we know that's not necessarily who I am. Although, Mr. Snark does live somewhere in my brain sometimes. And sometimes I entertain their monologues. But I did find myself responding initially kind of quite strongly to this, this statement that really was hurtful. Right. Mm-hmm, even if it was packaged as an intent to compliment. And I would say, at first I felt bad about kind of the snarkiness. And then the more I thought about it, I'm more like, this is just a natural reaction. Like it was okay to want to be a little snarky. It was what I did with it that was up to me. But at the same time, I was just like, my body, my mind, my heart knew that was not nice to me. And I didn't receive it well, and it didn't feel good. So to try to like push that away, was unfair to me. And then I just found myself, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, because you said when they said that to you, your body, your heart knew that it wasn't good, or what
wasn't nice. Yeah. Didn't feel good.
I'm so sorry. What wasn't nice? The feeling, or what the person had said to you?
What the person had said to me, that wasn't nice. And then I didn't feel good because of it. And then I was stuck in this weird place, right? Where it's somebody who's, at least in this moment, trying to give a compliment and I didn't like it. So then it's like, well, what do I do? Do I save face? Like, oh, thank you so much. When I'm not really like, I don't want to thank them for it. I want to take it and throw it away, this compliment that they gave me. Or to like call it out and be like, that really actually wasn't very nice, or like that didn't feel good, the compliment. Then it's, oh, but that's not what I intended. So I was stuck in this place of like, what do I do? And I found that being stuck in that place, I was also dismissing my immediate like knee-jerk reaction, which was kind of be like, what, I wasn't handsome before, like to kind of like give him a little bit of a zinger. Yeah. And even then I found that the suppression of that zinger was starting to make me feel guilty or bad, that I was like a bad, quote unquote, a bad person for wanting to throw a little zinger back at them.
When you describe that, I just immediately think of that actor, Jonah Hill. Jonah Hill, he was in Moneyball, and was he in Superbad? I don't know. And, he's just this comedian. He is a comedian actor who used to be a little on the heavy set side, and he lost a lot of weight. And, he's a famous Hollywood actor. So on social media, there was a lot of commentary and seemingly positive. But it also, to your point, kind of hurt him, made him feel very uncomfortable to just have his looks and his appearance and his weight loss be such a place of discussion. So he actually came out on social media and, during interviews to, outright say, thank you very much. But this actually does make me feel uncomfortable. And I think he, in another interview, he even delved further in terms of, how this might be a reflection of his worth, or how he made his weight be a reflection of his worth, and that kind of stuff. And so called out the fact that though the positive commentary might have truly solely been meant positively and truly solely meant as a compliment, it was then received as an insult. So I can't help think of of his journey, or even Rebel Wilson. So Rebel Wilson, the Australian actress, she's in Pitch Perfect and a number of other movies, and she lost quite a bit of weight. And she actually in a very recent interview spoke to the same thing of how a lot of people even wondered, will she be castable now at this point, because she's not having this identity anymore of the heavy set woman, and how she lost the weight for her own reasons, primarily health. And really it's something that was very personal, and internal to her. And yet all of this outward commentary actually made her feel uncomfortable. And, I empathize with that. I get that quite a lot. As a immigrant Filipina, when people find out that I'm an immigrant Filipina, it's amazing how many people say, "Oh, well, where's your accent? You speak really well," or, "Wow, you use really big words. You're actually smart." I don't, and the two don't seem to even have to be in the same category. So I don't see why one negates or confounds the other. Because we cannot control others, we can just fortify ourselves and observe, examine, with curiosity as opposed to judgment. How do we receive it? Are there parts of it that we can take solely as a compliment and just focus on the fact that it's a compliment? And even for the insult side of the backhanded compliment, so that we have control over the circumstance. Do we even look at it or receive it as an insult? When we're really not sure, and when we're really sitting in that unsettled place of like, did he mean that? Or did she mean that? And before reacting to that, and rather really in any circumstance, rather than reacting to anything, if we can respond instead, the way that we shift from a place of reaction, which is usually visceral and emotional, the way that we can switch and flip from reacting to responding is getting more information. And whether it's getting more information with ourselves, where we self-check ourselves, like, why am I receiving it this way? Is it truly an insult? Ask myself, am I receiving it in a certain way? Or honestly, flip back with a question to the other person. What do you mean by that? Did you mean it this way? Or, I heard it this way. Did you mean it that way? Or one of my favorite lines in this movie, Shadowlands, it's about this American professor, and she's in England, and here she is, a woman, and this is in the 1950s, and she's in England. They at Oxford or Cambridge, she was quite looked down upon and kind of talked down to a lot. And in this movie, in Shadowlands, a professor also gave a backhanded compliment, like, "Oh boy, for a woman, you're really smart," or, "Oh, for American, you're really quite polished," or, something along those lines. And she, what's the word? Like, it's with such cutting wit, almost sardonic. She, rather than reacting, posed a question. Now, ironically, just like how there's a backhanded insult in the compliment, there's really an answer in the question that she posed, which was, she said, "Yes, you're right. I am an American. And so please tell me, because I'm new here in England, I'm not really familiar with English humor. Were you trying to be funny, or were you just stupid?"
Oh, yes.
And yes, there's a little like snarkiness there, but that does give the opportunity to call out something, or even without sardonic, snarkiness, if it's truly like, did you mean it this way? Or I received it this way. How did you mean it? It gives a little space and grace in that moment and in that circumstance to clarify how you feel and what the person intended.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because of how many times the seemingly complimented moment was, it happened so frequently that I had time to practice the receiving and then what I was going to say back. And also, because it happened so much, I also was able to separate my emotional response from whatever they were
or
giving.
Emotional reaction. So reaction is visceral. So there's no processing. So reaction is reflexive and it's visceral. So there is no processing. A response is the processing of it. And again, that's processing either what's happening in you and how you received it, how you approached it, how you interpreted it. So there's a self-check in that. And then there's a check or opportunity for the other person to clarify. And then you have a more discerned response as opposed to an emotional visceral reaction.
Mm-hmm. So I think both happen because of the frequency by which it occurred. And I'm talking tremendously often, mm-hmm. that then I was given so many opportunities to practice that my reaction, there was a lot more distance. So it's like, okay, right. It was almost like this is what it is. But I was also able to practice the response. And what I think is tremendous about what you said was I was able to rehearse some responses back, questions back, or ways to come back to somebody in whatever way felt honored what response I wanted to give in that moment, right? Which was, oh my gosh, you look so good now. And then I could say, well, what do you mean by that? Now, I found often that they would dig themselves deeper, and then it just became comical for me because I'm like, okay, I now know we're not going to get out of this, but I was in a much more solid place. I wasn't really on my heels, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So just the rehearsing of a possible question or way of responding, to your point, helped me tremendously. And I will say that strategy helped because the weight loss was one thing. I wasn't necessarily prepared as I started to come out for people to say things like, you're not as gay as I thought you would be. Oh. And yeah, big eyes, right? I'm like, I really don't know what to do with that. Mm-hmm. But then what was fascinating about what you said is because that thought is, I don't know what to do with that. I could then turn that into a question and say, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean by gay in that sense? So it really was coming from a place of like, I need more information to understand and process. So absolutely. Thank you so much for throwing that out there, because that was definitely a strategy that I used to help me figure out, okay, where am I going to go with step 2 or step 3? And not also feel like I had to just receive it. It was like, no, I actually could take it and decide what to do with it. And I had agency there.
As a physician, that just makes me think of something that I sometimes tell my patients and my coaching clients, which is when you allow yourself that time, even if it's like instantaneous and just a few seconds, but that pause between reaction and response so that you can discern, that's then actually when you can become your own prescription and you can be your own solution, because it's kind of like, if you want others to stop complimenting you, or you want others to figure out that is actually a backhanded compliment, then it's kind of like if, as a physician, I'm telling my patient, okay, you have diabetes, so now tell everybody else not to give you sugar. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, okay, it's not about any longer about what others do. It's okay, given the circumstance, what are my thoughts and my feelings about it, so that I then take action that then has a result about it. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about agency, which is that way you're not waiting for others to be the fix or be the cure. And another way that I frame this is, rather than recognizing your triggers and asking and wanting everybody to stop triggering you, or even live so defensively that you're trying to avoid all the triggers, you actually instead, rather than being triggered, you become activated. So what do you activate yourself to do in said circumstances, so you don't have to walk on eggshells your whole life, avoiding triggers or wanting other people to say a certain thing or behave a certain way? I also want to applaud you and that point that you made about how it got to a point where it actually became humorous. Whether it was like humorous for the person giving you the compliment, you could approach it with humor. I can't help but think there's a story that I repeat to this company of ortho surgical reps that come into my cases to provide their service in terms of giving me their implants and that kind of stuff. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. My subspecialty is, arthroscopic and reconstructive surgery and sports medicine. But my subspecialty, like my super specialty, is knee and shoulder arthroscopy. And so that's my thing. And I was in a case with a rep who, very experienced rep, has been an ortho rep for this company for many, many years. He knows his implants well. He's worked with many surgeons, across the nation. And, so I respect his expertise, and, he seemingly respected mine. And the reason I say seemingly, and I joke because we're actually friends now, but he was kind of new to Hawaii. He was there for maybe a year or so. So kind of didn't really, know me, but had been in my cases many times before. But it was just the funniest thing because I had a very complicated, massive rotator cuff tear. And this rotator cuff tear was very large, to the point where it can quite easily be fixed open with open surgery. But to repair it arthroscopically, you require special tricks and techniques that, a subspecialist shoulder arthroscopist, knows. And so anyway, so we're in the case and it's arthroscopic. So, you can see the rotator cuff tear that I'm working on a screen. And we have this saying in surgery, it's like in trying to repair it, it's trying to kind of make, everybody knows, making lemonade out of lemons, but we say in surgery sometimes it's trying to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. Like it was just torn apart. It was shredded. And it was really kind of just one of those things like, how in the world is this all going to come together? But, step by step, with, the tips, techniques, and pearls that not only do I do, but I train other surgeons how to do it. Step by step, it all came together. And, that last stitch that I put together, that the last stitch that I tied, and then all of a sudden, everything looked, beautiful. I hear in back of me, that's all I heard from the ortho rep. And I turned around and because I'm done with the surgery, and I turned around, I'm like, and he's like, yeah, that came together really well. You actually are good. And so like, I couldn't help but laugh. The two things, as if it's a surprise. And then actually, like, you actually are good. I'm just kind of like, I don't quite know how to take that. And so I just paused, and it was like silence in the room. And like, you could cut the tension in the air. And I said, did you just hear what you said? Did I hear exactly what you said? He actually didn't hear what he said because he didn't know why it was so quiet in the room. I said, was that a surprise to you that it all came together? But yes, I was wearing my mask, but I think my eyes are quite expressive. You can tell that I was like being playful and like calling him out on it. Yeah. And that just, cut the tension. And then everybody started laughing. And then he recognized actually how that was, a backhanded compliment, but he really truly meant it in a great way, because it's just what looked like, chicken shit came together quite beautifully, better than chicken salad even. Yeah. And it was in his, just kind of, I don't know, natural state of wonder or whatever, that there was no filtering and no process, and it just came out of his mouth. But he didn't mean it that way. But he then learned how it could have been taken. And yes, I've never let him live it down, but years later, I still tell the story, obviously. But he also recognizes that was a great teaching moment for him, as to how I could have received it, and how any surgeon could have received it, truth be told. And so it was a great lesson, but a lesson treated with humor. It was a way for me to kind of humbly stand my ground and give him the opportunity of like, did you really mean it that way?
A couple things. And you said this in the middle of your story, and I think it's tremendously powerful. You said, I don't know how to take that. And I think what you just hit is the nugget, which is you get to choose. Mm-hmm. It's not on the other person to decide how you're going to take that. And I know I myself have often said, I don't know how to take that. And then they will say, well, you need to take it as a compliment because that's how I meant it. And you're like, well, I didn't feel that way, Mm-hmm. And now I'm stuck like, do I have to take it the way they intended it when that's not necessarily what my reaction was, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know how to take it is my response. It's up to me, right, to decide how I want to respond. So you just in that moment just gave us like I think the critical piece of it, which is when somebody gives you a compli salt, you do have a tremendous opportunity to decide how you're going to take that. You can, and then there are a whole host of ways that you can respond. And I love humor as a way of responding. And I know that I am often not quick-witted enough to come up with that kind of witty, seemingly, direct, but also lighthearted enough that it hits that right balance. So I practice that. I actually do that. And I know that sounds like it might be kind of silly, like I'm looking at the mirror or I'm in the moment. Maybe, my response isn't necessarily full of humor, but then later I get back in my car, I walk away. I'm like, okay, how could I have responded in a different way that might have brought in a little levity, little humor, but also spoke how I wanted to speak. And then I use that as a way to practice so that maybe if I do want to bring humor into it, that I could. And some people are so good at it. I'm so jealous of them. You know what I mean? They just know how to do that. I think you were one of those people, Dr. Ignacio.
No, I definitely have I shoulda, coulda, woulda said this, but I just want to point out the distinction between, and I'm just going to do Michelle's word 2.0, which is the distinction between when it is a compliment salt, when it's really truly meant to be a compliment. But yes, there are things to be learned as to how that actually could be given or misconstrued or appropriately received even as an insult. But the intent of the giver was truly a compliment. Mm-hmm. And what do we do with that versus the compliment salt, where it's really more insult, and that really was what the person meant, and that was a microaggression, and that was like a passive aggressive true dig. I think it's important for us to give space and grace when it's due, in recognizing the giver of the phrase or the giver of the compliment truly meant it as a compliment versus an insult. And that's why, like I said, to the point of that surgical rep where he couldn't stop himself. It's not like he, had a canned response. He literally it just came out you actually are good. Yes, that reveals a little bit. It does reveal a little bit of what little bias he might have that he himself might not even know. He might have some, underlying implicit bias, but still give space and grace of okay, brother, I know you meant well, but do you see how this could have meant? But the whole situation then can be treated with space and grace, because I really don't think that surgical rep meant it as an insult. And yet it could be a teaching moment, because again, that's also how do I choose to receive it? And then in how I receive it, it's also then how do I volley it back to the other person? Mm-hmm. Do I volley it back to the other person with grace? Do I receive the compliment side of it? Decide and discern whether or not I want to point out that there's insult there. There's just so many steps, so many ways one can approach it. The whole reason why one reason why I thought of, this topic and this theme and why I called you, on the road, Zachary, is I was at lunch and I was with one of my absolute besties. She is such a bestie that if ever I need uplifting validation, just someone to sit with silence, and I know that she'll understand, this is my bestie. So I preface that to say that she is never one to ever want to bring me down, ever. And I know that. We were at lunch and I was just lamenting how my being 52 years old and this, up and down battle of weight and everything. And I was just lamenting how round my face is. And let me call it as it is, how fat my face has become. And I would, joke about yep, that's my fat Filipino face. And I can't even blame it on my Filipino-ness, because let's just be honest, it's just the weight that I gained. How did my face get so round and fat? And I'm just lamenting about my fat, round Filipino face. And my bestie, in wanting to lift me up, said, no. In fact, Jane and I, when we were going for a run, Jane was telling me, what is it that Elizabeth does? We as runners, our face, they were lamenting their wrinkles, or how gaunt their face looks, and how with the running, it pulls their face. By the way, they're both gorgeous. I don't know what they're talking about, but that's what they were lamenting. And so my friend, in wanting to lift me up at this moment at lunch, said, yeah, no, Jane was even saying, what does Elizabeth do? Because her face is always so full. It's just so full and so youthful. And I'm thinking to myself, you should have seen my face. It was stoic. I just looked at her full. That's another word for fat and round. Right. That's exactly what I'm saying. That didn't help. But I had to self-check, and I even joked with her, and I told her that's where the humor comes too, is that I told her actually how I received it. I know you meant, I know, when Jane said that to you, I wasn't even there. So that it wasn't even about compliment or insult. Right. I have, they were in a good way talking about me. So it's not even something given to me, but here she's giving me that as a gift to me. No, you're, if anything, we covet your face. And I'm just kind of that doesn't help, because I'm not liking what you're liking about my face. Yes. But I had to self-check, she 100%, 110% meant it as a compliment. So again, whatever is my trigger, that's not on her, that she's telling me this. And so, all right, Elizabeth, do the work of how are you going to receive this, and receive it purely as it was purely meant. It was purely meant as a compliment. There was no dig there whatsoever. And I know that because, like I said, she gifted me this memory of or recalling this conversation with our other friend, Jane. So she truly was giving this to me as a gift. And if I am to receive it any other way, then that is on me. That I'm truly taking it as an insult. She's gifting me this, and I'm taking it as an insult. That's how I received it. And so that's where, there's the space and grace that we give to others, and then the space and grace given to ourselves for especially the real complinsults, when it's truly meant to be an insult. Then that's a time where we give ourselves the space and grace of recognizing, oh, no, that was meant as an insult. So I'm going to, give myself strength and fortitude to recognize and stand my ground of there was an insult there, and I, took it that way. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I would say that I think that, as often is the case with us, we throw out a topic, and then as we find that we start to really gnaw at it, that there's tremendous amount, right? That the bone of stuff that we thought that we were going to be chewing on is actually like a ham hock. There's just so much here, which is why I think the discernment, as you're bringing up, of whether it felt more pure in its intention, or maybe microaggression, malicious, or there was negative intent there, discerning the two and then what to do from there, I think is so meaty that I don't know that we're going to get into it in this episode. And I throw out doing another episode where we really get into that more, because I also think it then helps us in those moments think about, maybe we have similarly done complissalts, and what we do when the person comes back to us and how we receive them. Now, I'd like to believe that I never go more on the insult side of the complisalt, but who knows? I'm sure, I'm human, we all are, but it would still be, I think there's still more here to dig into in another episode about the discernment and what to do. Particularly, we focused a little bit more on the compliment side of the complisalt, but really what happens if it's more a complisalt, right?
Yes.
So, because you kicked us off beautifully when you talked about the pause, that moment to just pause and check in, so that you have now put a little space between your reaction and your response. Well, your response is going to look a lot different if you've suspected that person meant to be malicious, or meant to hurt, or meant to sting, or whatever that intention was. And I would love to share some experiences that I've had, and I would love to hear experiences that you had, and then how we handled it in the moment of, ooh, that was meant that was meant to hurt, that was meant to sting. I would like to get into that a little bit more. So
Yeah.
I throw out, let's do a round 2 on this and get in that. But I would say, to your point, we actually talked about this in the gift giving episode around the holidays, which is sometimes we get a gift and maybe it's not the gift that we wanted, but looking at the intention behind the gift is really where we can see what was meant to happen and what that person was really trying to do was to demonstrate, I thought about you. Like and that there's a relationship building there. I also think you'd never dismissed your initial reaction. Like you never said, I'm not going to tell myself that this didn't feel good. You're like, no, I didn't really like it. But after a little bit of time, that space and grace, then I can see it a little more clearly. I can see what her intention was. It's very similar to the episode that we talked about when it was, giving of gifts and the receiving of gifts, which is looking at the intention behind, even if our initial reaction was like, oh, I didn't like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I will also say, just to kind of bring this back, I do really appreciate that you brought up Jonah Hill, because I felt, as somebody who experienced similar comments about that very thing, about weight loss, for Jonah Hill to come out publicly, and even Rebel Wilson, and say what he said, I saw that as such an affirmation for all of the times that I didn't say I didn't like that. Mm-hmm. And whether or not, I think he did that for himself, because that was the response that he wanted for himself. Yeah. And I so championed that. And as also somebody who wanted to take some of those steps and respond that way and didn't, I was like, okay, this person did it. That gives me the inspiration to then do it going forward. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. So thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. So listeners, come back.
Come back,
because round 2, we're going to get into complinsults more on the insult side, the complinsults. Is that what you said?
Yes. Complinsults. So that it's more insult than compliment, and intended to be so.
Mm-hmm. But until then, remember that you are not just simply enough.
You are more than enough.
Just as you are.
Period. Mwah. Love you, everybody. Come back for the next one.